Fantastic, and thank you all for joining me for this national. So we're moving from the local, regional, all the way up to the national. I thought I'll just share 4 or 5 points from the previous session just to kind of, if you like, ease into ours. So we heard about, from Yusuf in particular, about the need to have an authentic voice for the whole system, the importance of relationships, and we heard that from our audience as well, of how relationships are being built, but that they take time and investment, the opportunity cost of getting everybody around the table, the hard work that everybody needs to do, particularly with employers. I heard a lot more points of collaboration between colleges and independent training providers, which I thought was a really positive point about collaboration. The importance of building trust and trust in the system and promoting the system back. The need for employers to do a bit more, actually, and the need to kind of challenge that back in terms of if you want those skills, how do we work all together to get those? So please don't just ask, but collaborate, come closer, let's have those solutions together. And I really liked what Sally was talking about all those relationships you're building, Sally, with large employers in all sorts of different opportunities there. And I liked, Yusuf's your final point about leadership and how it is important that we have that system leadership approach at some early level, early point in time, so that we can get across the system from a school to a university to a further education provider, from adult, from independent, from college, from SEND, everybody working together in collaboration. And I suppose I was left with that final very important point, how difficult it is to predict the skills of the future. And Kate's, clear example of all the thousands of kind of people we've got every month, and yet the difference between what we trained, I'm slightly older than most of you probably, but where we were versus where our children or younger colleagues are heading. So what I suggest we do is probably some opening remarks from you in terms of how you see things from the national perspective in the skills wider sense right now, from your lens, because I appreciate you all bring different lenses. It would be nice for you to tell us what is your lens and your perspective in this. And then we can open up from some reflections and conversation and, of course, open up to the collective. So, Philip, I'll start with you.
Yeah, of course. Is that on? Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm Philip Lefebvre, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of NCFE. Many of you will know NCFE is an awarding organisation, an educational charity. It's been around for over 175 years, and we have that sort of national perspective, particularly around the qualification system and the assessment system and how that can support this. And in kind of preparing for this, I was thinking about some recent changes we've seen, in particular Skills England. And today there's been a policy summary published around the bill that's come into Parliament. And I think Skills England represents a massive opportunity to address some of the challenges that you've just talked about, actually, Katerina, in your opening. I think we all would agree that our system is at times too siloed. We've got skills mismatches that it calls out. And we lack some of those essential skills for people to get into work or get on in work, as well as some of those higher technical skills. So all of that is true. It can and it should play that coordinating role, and linking up with the Industrial Strategy Council, the Migration Advisory Committee. I think all of that is really exciting, but there is a but. All of this is going to take time to kind of be implemented. So the bill's got to get through. Then the changes around the machinery of government have to happen. So I think as a sector, waiting for all of that to happen is potentially the wrong way to go. And actually, I think we need to act quicker than that. And over and above that, I think we can't expect too much, because what we've seen with Skills England so far is probably incremental change rather than really transformational change. And I can understand that, but there are big questions about the degree to which it will be able to influence other departments and other skills agendas, particularly as it is going to be even closer into DFE than even IFATE was. So what do we do about that? I think it's imperative that we address the 5 missions of government as a sector. So we don't just think about the FE sector and what we need. We think about those government missions, and I think there's some really strong alignments there, whether it's about building a sustainable NHS, or it's creating or turning the UK and England into a sort of clean energy superpower. There are really clear strands around skills. And what we've got to do is use the evidence we have, to your point, collaborate together, because our voice can be stronger, to try and influence those government agendas and go beyond perhaps some of the stakeholders that we traditionally work with, so DFE, IFATE, but also those other departments, whether that is the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, or it is the Department for Health and Social Care, really targeting them and making it clear what our role is in delivering on those missions of government.
Very clear, thank you. I'll summarise in the end, so I'll go straight to Ben.
Brilliant, thanks, Philip. My name is Ben Blackledge. I'm from WorldSkillsUK. For those who don't know, we are a network of organisations across the UK which is committed to world-class excellence in technical education. And we do that through a series of different things. One is around being in Lyon and representing the UK at the international competition, and then bringing that learning back into the UK to make sure that at a local, at a regional, at a college, at an ITP level, the learnings that we get from international competition can really help to kind of drive forward quality within the sector. And then the final thing is looking at profile, and how do we make sure that the sector and the route through into careers and skills, and we talked a lot about what we mean by skills, but that kind of route through is seen as not even an alternative, but a really high quality route to a really high quality career that sets you up regardless of whether you end up in the thing you've been taught or whether you end up something completely different. That is the route through in terms of giving you the skills you need for life. And I wanted to, and this may be, so Yusuf alluded to, I've got a 6-week-old at home, so this may be sleep deprivation, or it may be Gavin's brief that this is about doing things slightly differently, but I didn't want to run you through kind of what we do and what I see in that. So I wanted to, I guess, just set some things up in terms of this kind of big question. And someone a while ago, and I can't remember where, it was in some management or leadership thing, was talked about dualisms and the danger of dualisms in terms of thinking about really complex things. And so this is a really complex question. This whole thing around skills and how it works is a really complex question. So I just wanted to very briefly, and I promise very briefly, unpack 6 different dualisms that I see from my work nationally and internationally. And the first one is the title here around policy and pedagogy. And in terms of looking at one or the other to solve the problems we're facing, one or the other to have to happen before the other one can really thrive. Philip talks about it a little bit. Even if Skills England is the best thing ever and it fixes all of the things we want to fix, we are still a year to 18 months before it has any kind of sense of what that is. And then we're still a year and 18 months before it starts doing those things. So my take and my view and the work that we're doing through the Centre of Excellence with NCFE and with lots of the colleges in the room and ITPs in the room is looking at how do we bring that learning back into pedagogy right now? How do we make sure that with all the things that we'd like to change around qualifications, around frameworks, around funding, we have a really high quality workforce who are really up for doing the absolute best for their students and for their local community. And so how do we make sure, well, not how do we are looking at making sure that we invest in those teachers, that we say that actually what you do is a professional, high quality service, and how do we give them access to that international perspective in terms of what they do. So that's the first one. Policy and pedagogy need to not be seen as 2 different things. They need to be seen as being working in collaboration. Second one, and I know we're looking at all 5 of the missions, but looking at opportunity and growth. And I think from my point of view, sometimes, especially the skills sector, can see opportunity first and growth second. And I worry that that doing it in that way round undermines the opportunity that we're doing. And they've got to sit together, because if we're saying we want all learners, regardless of background, regardless of level they come to us, regardless of their potential outlook, that actually their growth opportunity is restricted, and we just want to make it as easy as possible for them to enter, then we're doing them a disservice. And also we're depriving the wider economy of all the value that we have in this country. So looking at how do we make sure that when we talk about opportunity, and so we work all the way from entry level all the way through to level 7 in terms of the work we do. And when we talk about excellence, and I'll come on to that next, we're talking about excellence at every single level. It's not something that you have to be a certain level of attainment, a certain level of qualification. Excellence and true excellence for those people, but also the people around them, can be attained at whatever level. And so I think when we're looking at opportunity and growth, and I do think there is a sense of making sure that that thing around us being, and the sector being kind of anchor institutions, needs to not be at the cost of looking at how do we expect a lot from the people that come through and how do we support them in a really inclusive way to get there. Third one is around competence to excellence, and this is something that we talk about a lot, and it's talking about the fact that our system and how we're geared up in it and how we're funded and how we teach to assessment is looking at competence. And there's nothing wrong with competence, but it feels to me like we need to be asking for more and looking at how do you go from incompetence, which is obviously the opposite, to competence and then push forward into that. And what does that stretch and challenge look like? Not just for those who we see as the able people, but are the able students, but all students. What does that stretch and challenge look like? And I see again and again when we go out into the network, institutions that are embedding this for all of their students, and the difference it makes is not dependent on level of attainment or level at all. The difference it makes in terms of their confidence, in terms of being told they're good at something, being told of seeing that in a tangible, objective way is massive. And so I think we've got to look at the whole system being developed for looking at excellence as what we should be expecting. Fourth is around flexibility and credibility. And we talked about that a bit in the earlier session. How do we make sure that there's a system that's ready for the future? And I think things like being more, this is sleep deprivation, being more specific about which standards, which skills we're looking at more regularly and which ones we know aren't going to change, making sure that the limited resources we have centrally in government and in the local area are being looked at where we think there's going to be real growth, looking at different approaches to qualification in terms of short form, modular, all those kind of things. But also I think there's a fundamental shift in terms of what we think is rigorous or robust or credible isn't necessarily an academic route. And I think there's still a tendency to think if we want to make sure something's really robust and repeatable, we have to do a written test or we have to do a multiple choice. And there is a place for that, but I would argue that WorldSkills, not WorldSkills UK, but part of that WorldSkills International, has a really robust way of assessing in a reliable, relatable, cost-effective way that is something that can be really recognised as really world-class. And so we need to look at vocational education, TVET, whatever you want to call it, being robust because it's assessed in a way that's appropriate to it, not something that's comparable to academic. And I am coming to land, I promise. National, international, and I expect you would think me to talk about the international a lot, and I think that, again, this is thinking about not them as two different things, but the fact that everyone in this room will have an international element to their role, whether it's that their local economy is internationally exposed, whether they've got students who are international, whether they have heard of different reports, different ways of doing things around the world. What we need to be thinking about from an international point of view, in my view, is not how do we export the UK around the world, because I think that is a fairly outdated view. Yes, we have really good reputation internationally in terms of the system. Some of that I think is true, some of that is legacy, but we also have that as an opportunity to go out and learn from other people. So I think we need to think about international not as a separate thing from the national, but as completely interconnected. And the more we do that, the more value we go. And the final thing is something that I talk about quite a lot, is about flash and substance. As an organisation, we've known for a long time for Flash. We ran a massive event in Birmingham at the NEC, the Skills Show, which was 70,000, 80,000 young people over 3 days. It was a huge celebration of skills. We obviously go internationally every 2 years and do have a massive kind of media presence there. That is massively important in terms of changing the perspective of skills and the value and how they are globally important and how the UK can really stand on the forefront of that. But we've got to back that up with substance in terms of looking at how do we make sure that if we're saying we've got a world-class system, if politicians are saying that's our ambition, how do we invest? And I don't just mean that in terms of more money from Treasury. How do we all invest in terms of making sure that that happens? And so, yeah, hopefully that's a kind of useful food for thought.
And a way to remember it as well. So thank you for that. Again, I'll come back with reflections. Ben, over to you.
Thank you. Really lovely to be here. So I love the idea of sizzle and sausage when it comes to some of this. We need both. I think just one thing. I think we are at risk of talking down our skills system all the time. I understand. I've said it in the past that we've got a broken system. We need to fix it because it gets attention. But it needs improving. But it's not broken. We still have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people going through our skills system, getting great skills and going into great jobs. We have tens of thousands of employers who really care about it and are really involved. Of course, we can do more. And I think I want to talk about what we at AELP think should happen. First of all, AELP, I'm sure most of you know AELP. We're best known for being the membership organisation for independent training providers. As confirmed in parliamentary questions last week, independent training providers deliver 2/3 of all apprenticeships. But actually in AELP's membership, you've got a growing number of universities and FE colleges, as well as awarding organisations and employers actually as well. Anyone who has an interest in working at that cusp of skills and employment and where the two meet, which is where it really happens, are members of AELP. So our view is quite broad-based actually about what the skills system could and should look like with this opportunity ahead of us. So there are three components to that. Is what is Skills England and what is that going to do? Secondly is what happens with the growth and skills levy. And the third is the other important dimension of this is devolution. So how do those three things kind of come together in a system that works where the different parts are supporting each other? So our view is on Skills England. Actually, if Skills England talks up its role in coordinating, making things happen, and all of those sorts of things, I think it's setting itself up for potential failure. Because actually, as an executive agency of the department, it's not going to have that much wiggle room or authority to, as it were, boss the system when it comes to, is it the Labour Market Advisory Board out of DWP? Is it the Migration Advisory Council that's doing this work on IT and engineering for Yvette Cooper? Which one? If it's setting itself up to say we're going to be the conductor of this orchestra, then I think it's going to struggle and waste a lot of time and effort trying to fulfil that role. Actually, what we know is that we need more. We need all that data out there. We don't need super whizzy futuristic analysis. We just need to lay it out in a way that everyone can understand and can see what's going on across the country. That's the first thing, is the data and the insight. The second thing is around the programs and the standards that are available for funding through the second part, the levy, where we think one of the crucial things that that process needs to do is to allow for evolution and flexibility. So actually what we are suggesting is that within the programs, and I'll talk a little bit in a moment about what the suite of programs could be, but within those programs there is an element, as was mentioned earlier, I think the Dutch system where 70 or 80% is set nationally and there's 20% that's local. It's actually a bit of a free-for-all. We don't think it should be a free-for-all like it is in Holland for that last 20%. But actually the sector skills councils, devolved areas, other bodies who have a legitimate interest and point of view should be able to contribute and say, actually, within that 20 or 30% that's flexible, these are the modules that we would like to see added to it. Now, that not only means that people can feel like they own their programs locally or across their sector, but they can actually evolve much more easily, because at the moment with standards and programs, everyone has to agree 100% of the program at any one time. So we do it, we put it to bed, we say thank God for that, and then a month later people come and say it's out of date. It's like, well, it's not scheduled for review for another couple of years, so we better wait till then. And then there's the friction that causes in the system as employers going, but why can't we do this? Or providers are saying, why can't we do this? Whereas if you said actually an element is optional, well, let's just add that as an option. Let's add that as an option, see if people actually take it up. So if the North East engineers say they desperately want this module in the programme and no one else is saying it, it's okay, add it. Let them decide, and then actually maybe others will look at it and go, oh, hold on, actually, yeah, we do want that. And it becomes part of the standard. So building in a process that allows that evolution, I think, is a key target, key objective for Skills England. In terms of the programmes that can be delivered through the Growth and Skills Levy, our very clear view is that we need to preserve what's special about apprenticeships, which is not that they're 12 months, it's not that they have functional skills in the way they do, or whatever we might say. It's that they are this triple helix of a job, of off-the-job learning, and structured supervision from the employer. This is where the employer engagement is so key, which binds together as this triple helix. Now, that is a really valuable training program. It's true of all good training programs, government funded or not. If you think about the best training programs you've been on at work, they will have been like that. So we need to keep that, but it doesn't need 12 months. So we're suggesting that they're flexible about duration of apprenticeships. So foundation apprenticeships was emerged from some of our thinking and our roadshows with employers and providers as a way of allowing young people, mainly, to get into those professions where a 12-month apprenticeship has just been overkill and has dragged the programme back in areas like entry-level construction, retail, hospitality, and so on. Alongside that, we want to allow for short-duration apprenticeships, which the department is actively considering, where people who've already done a ton of the learning don't need to do 12 months, because actually maybe they need 3 months or 6 months to get themselves up to the level of qualification. But insisting they do 12 months makes the apprenticeship really unappealing and unaffordable. And then beyond that, for people who are already in their career, but where the only option for their employers to use levy funding is a full whack 15-month kind of program, is saying, actually, let's take little packets of the KSBs, modules, for want of a better word, that people can then do in their workplace. So an electrician can do their solar panel installation course without having to do a whole new apprenticeship. So that's the way their employer uses the levy, but not just sending them off to a Warwick Business School or somewhere at some night school to do something on their own, but they're still fully engaged in that programme. So we think that that's the suite of programmes that should be funded by the levy, overseen by Skills England, who are able then to steer what's in those programmes through reference to all of those other groups, including the devolved nations. The devolved nations and that's a big one actually, but I think it should stretch to the devolved nations, but to devolved areas. And I think what devolved areas are going to be best at is not creating their own set of qualifications. And I think Manchester have shown the way on this. Their MBAC is not a new qualification, it's 6 GCSEs. It's very clever and a really good way of approaching it. It's branded, it gets local attention. Andy Burnham can say to local employers, we've got kids who are going to be coming through with this qualification. Local kids are saying, wow, this is exciting. Someone's actually putting us on a pathway. But if they move to Leeds, they've got 6 GCSEs, right? That's a really good model for how I think we want it to be. What local areas can do that national cannot do is bash heads together. That's what we mean by coordination, right? Is bash heads together locally to say, actually, can you please come along? Can we please twist the arm of your finance director to just release a little bit of funding to get this programme going? Can you just please get round the table, have a word with this college, have a word with this ITP, show them that you're serious about making this happen? That bashing of heads together, particularly around getting kids who are on a path to nowhere, on a path to somewhere, age 16, 17, 18, is where devolved areas can really add value and then draw on the national skills system to then provide that longer-term destination for people. So that's what we think should happen.
You've just redesigned the whole apprenticeship system with such fluidity of and eloquent kind of comments. I will come back to all of that, so thank you for that. Olly.
Great, it's absolutely lovely to be here. Thank you so much. So, like Ben, I was trying to do something a little bit different when I was thinking about this. And in the earlier session, there was quite a lot of talk about kind of the way that government works, the way that government makes decisions. And so I wanted to kind of just pick up on that a little bit. So I'm from the Edge Foundation, but I spent 12 years in the Department for Education. So I like to say that I'm making amends for that. But actually, of course, it was a really good experience. And I have a huge amount of confidence in civil servants. And I was reflecting back on 2 things from this morning. One was Eddie's really powerful discussion about history and how much history there is and how we've pretty much tried everything in this space. And I had a really good conversation with Kate outside, and we were just saying that this whole system, whether it's policymakers, people on the ground, is stuffed with really lovely people who it's nice to spend a day with. How come, there's so many nice people trying to do the right thing. Nobody's trying to make it worse. Why have we still not got there? And after 30 years, sometimes even longer than that, some of our history stuff kind of links back to kind of 100 years. So what's kind of going wrong there? So apologies, it's going to be a bit policy nerdy, but I think it might raise some issues that are about, to use the phrase from this morning, the wiring underneath the decision making that we might need to tackle. So the first of those came up this morning. It's the kind of 5-year term of government, and it's the fact that as a minister, you need to put your name on something. So the best thing to put your name on and cut a ribbon on is a new building. The second thing is probably a new type of qualification, like a T-level, then you can be attached to that. The least glamorous things are things like teaching and learning, boring. But actually those are things that really matter, or teacher pay. We've seen with the school buildings falling down that, there are things that you don't want your name attached to, and you kind of try and hide from those. But there's something that's not quite working there. Obviously, the best solution there would be a greater degree of consensus between parties, and it is possible. I worked as a specialist advisor on a Lords committee looking at some of this work, and there was massive consensus amongst really experienced politicians from different fields. So it is possible, and I hold on to that kind of possibility. The second is civil servants having to move around so quickly, and that's part of the kind of nature of the civil service. Is you get up by moving on from doing skills one week to doing prisons the next, to doing health, and showing that you're really flexible. And actually, there's a movement against that. Tamara Finkelstein, who is a brilliant permanent secretary and head of the policy profession at the moment, is pushing back against this idea of kind of generalists being the only way. I think a small cadre of generalists who are experienced at really rapidly moving would be great, but actually why don't we value experience and people who've spent their whole career making policy in our case skills, who know the landscape, and we're trying to kind of help that a little bit with the work that we've done on policy history, so writing these chronologies of 30, 40 years of policy making, digging down into policies that are there. To take your point about kind of flexibility in apprenticeships and foundation apprenticeships, I really hope the team there is going to be looking back at young apprenticeships, foundation apprenticeships in Scotland, at the flexibilities that existed 10 years ago. I fear that might not be the case if it's an exciting group of fast-stream civil servants who've just landed, grab a piece of blank paper and are like, let's go for it. Siloed working, Ben mentioned this, so that is the nature. You're given a target to do something, to deliver some work placements for T-levels, to do something very specific. I think if we can use the mission-driven type of government to try and change that a bit, and there's hope, I think, with Skills England being much more connected into the migration advisory system, into the other departments, as you were saying, Philip, to try and kind of make a change there. National versus local, we've talked about this morning, but can we genuinely get more kind of devolved? So there's always that tension of, yes, we're saying we're devolving stuff, but really we know that ministers are still sort of accountable. Are we going to have that kind of hokey-cokey that we've had where it kind of goes out, it comes back in, it goes out? And finally, last one, which is the nerdiest bit, but I think is the most important. There's one particular style of policy making, which is called new public management, which was taught to us as the way things are done here. So there's only really one tool in the toolbox, and that is the style which is about carrot and stick, incentives, performance tables, keeping an eye on you, and it's led to a low trust system. And there are other ways to do that. It's just you're not told that there are other ways to make policy. So we could be making policy in partnership with others. We could be making policy in a much more devolved way, the kind of patchwork quilt approach. And it's not that civil servants wouldn't be able to do that. They're all skilled people, they're all lovely, but at the moment we're only kind of given one way of doing things, and that way hasn't delivered us a skills system that we wanted over the last 30 years.
Fantastic, thank you all. I'll try and summarize before I open the floor from our collective. So, Philip, you kicked us off with that quality and assessment lens and the idea that Skills England gives us the opportunity with the 5 missions, and I think everybody referred to them in a much more holistic way of influencing and of working together. And you talked about that cross-departmental work, which actually every single person in this room, I'm sure, will take away out of today's collective as an action. So we can all, from our own perspective, think, how can we think more laterally around this is not just about DFE, perhaps it's actually not about DFE, because there is so much out there around health and social care that you mentioned, or green skills, or engineering, or other areas. So there is something about thinking outside in a very, very different way that we've thought over the last decade or even more. And you talked about what you've been seeing as being more incremental rather than transformation, and how do we shift, how do we get to that point? Ben, I really liked your music and the duets. I thought there was a lot there in terms of how sometimes we get stuck with one thing and we think we can't move on to the next. And I really liked how you played that policy and pedagogy as a seamless flow rather than first, next, back. So that kind of start and stop, which sometimes we do. So you talked a lot about that sequencing and fluidity that we need to have between the opportunity and the growth. The competence and the excellence, which of course is very much your bag in World Skills, the flexibility and the credibility. I really like that. How there is that view that we have to only have one way, and sometimes it is the qualification, because it's the sexy way, to get to that credibility, rather than there's so many other ways of getting to that outcome and impact that we all want to make. The national and international, obviously, let's not think only about us and them, but everybody as a community, and what can we learn, and where is that transfer of innovation. And of course, I like the flash and substance, because a lot of us do the flash, and sometimes we forget that actually what brings people together and gets them really engaged is that substance. The packaging is good, but actually it's what is in it that matters. So thank you. Ben, wow, I mean, you've given us a lot of solutions there, which I would summarize into, let's simplify. let's offer a level of flexibility and agility. Let's celebrate local innovation. Let's look at things more from an evolution, and process can get in the way. So let's think how we get to the outcome without necessarily following the same process just because it's been there for a long time. And obviously, I like how you said, if Skills England, back to the music, becomes that conductor of the orchestra, then we really have a problem, and there is more about how do we get into that collaborative approach to things, and the employer engagement being key, I heard from you. Olly, fantastic to have the insight, both from the edge, perspective now, but also from your years of experience in the civil service. And that termism, it's short, it has to be 5 years, so let's get things done. And what is the most interesting thing? Well, it's qualifications. So we've been reviewing qualifications it feels at the moment, all the time, rather than actually just getting to see how we're going to move on with impact on our learners and get them to employability, get them out in the economy and society. So that is a very, very, I thought, very strong point there. The pace of the civil service and how we need to understand that, and the way the civil service work. Really useful point about the new public management and those incentives and handshakes. You do this, you get that, and that carrot kind of opportunity perspective. And of course, how using the mission-driven actually could help, that purpose alignment could actually help us to move forward in a much more cohesive way. So thank you all. As I've said in the beginning this morning, the quality of the collective is on the quality of the thinking of every single one of all of us here, and particularly you. So a huge thanks to you. And over to you, collective, for some provocations.
Any questions from anyone at all? Whoa. Could you see who you are? And can we keep the questions short, if that's all right, because it's really easy for the paneling.
Thank you. I'm Pauline Hagan. I work for the FE Commission. This is a question really about pedagogy, which is at the root of stronger skills. And I think everyone agrees that a stronger skills system needs to go right back to basics and get the pedagogy in classrooms and workshops right. And I think we'd all agree that teachers deserve to be supported in becoming exceptional in feeding knowledge, which passes into skills. So I'd like to ask, how do you think we can galvanise work to encourage the building of an evidence base for FE professionals and leaders, just like the schools have and like universities have, so that teachers know what works, teachers know impactful teaching to build skills and to take students from the procedural knowledge to the conditional knowledge of applying things in the real work, in the real life work environment. It needs to happen, and I'm floating it really as a question, keen to pick up your thoughts on that. I hope that wasn't too long. Sorry.
And I'm sure when you say teachers, you mean assessors, coaches, tutors, anybody supporting learners in whatever way, one-to-one, in a classroom, digital, online, in an apprenticeship, everything. So I'll start with Philip and...
It's on? Yeah, perfect. Really excellent question. So I think that your point about dissemination, I think, is absolutely critical. I was actually in a conversation yesterday with an organisation called Teachermatic, who's doing quite a lot of work around this, which is really good. But I left the conversation thinking, why is there kind of a private provider out there doing that? And how can we as a sector maybe work more collaboratively around some of the key sectors that we support to essentially identify best practice and disseminate that more effectively. So I think you're absolutely right there. I do think, and I'm not going to kind of go on too much detail on it, the pay in the FE sector does need to be addressed as well, so that we continue to attract people from different sectors into the classroom to build the capability and the skills of people who might have been in the FE workforce for quite a while and not in those sectors. And so I think that's critical. We need to see a fairer pay system to enable the right people to be in that ecosystem. I then think the next thing we need to look at really closely is professional development. And Ben made the point around competence to excellence. And obviously, we're very proud to support the Centre of Excellence, but how can we mainstream approaches like that really seek to not just see entering the workforce as the end goal, but actually how you then progress and develop within that workforce, and again, share best practice. So how can we create more of those type of mechanisms to support professional development, and also make clearer what that professional development pathway looks like for someone entering the FE workforce, because it isn't always really clear where you go and how you can develop different skills. The final point I'd say is promoting further research in the profession, and I know AOC we've worked with on programs like Research Further, because there is a dearth of research, applied research within FE, I think, particularly when you compare it to schools and universities, obviously. So we've got to do more to try and promote and support research within the workforce as well, which we then disseminate.
So just building on that, I guess I would say this, but I do think there is a really unique thing that we as an organisation have, in that we have had 70 years of being allowed and given the space to innovate, to do one-to-one training, to look at how that then compares on a biannual basis to those around the world. And for a long time, that was, completely frankly with you, that was the privilege of a few. So those that managed to get into national competitions and squad and team, so you're talking a couple of hundred a year of a massive sort of student population. And so what we have tried to do is to say, look, actually, there are principles, there are approaches. There's a WorldSkillsUK way, which isn't rocket science, but it's trying to package these things up in a different way, so that actually it, in the same way that Ben was talking about people getting behind the MBAC, because they understand it, it's clear, but it is something that's transferable across to whatever you're going to do. And I think the thing I would say, so we're in year 4 of the Centre of Excellence. We've worked directly with about 10,000 teachers over that time, and we know they've worked with about 200,000 students. I'm always surprised about, I guess, the level of willingness and commitment and want to get access to these things. And I think one of the biggest things, and me and Katerina talked about this, is the fact that there is no requirement to have a teaching qualification when you come into the FE sector. So right there off the bat, we're not, and this is not at anyone, we're not saying it's important that you know how to teach. So, I mean, that's the thing off the bat right there. And Sally talked this morning about, we are in a position where it's so hard to get people in that you have to be pragmatic about that. And so that's why, I guess, for me, yes, there are policy changes that can be made, but ourselves here, and I know ETF, I'm not up for waiting for that. So what can we do? How can we make the case for it? And so we're working with King's College, which I know are here, to look at a longitudinal study of the Centre of Excellence. So it is particularly for us to look at both retention and recruitment. So what impact does it have on people being able to recruit and then keeping the staff in, but also what impact does that have on learner outcomes, and both in terms of achievement rates, which we know anecdotally are being improved by being involved in it, but also what does it mean for destinations and earnings and those kind of things. And then finally, very quickly, I'd just say that I think there is also an opportunity for thinking differently about what we mean by teaching excellence, especially within the technical education sector. And if we're going to get employer engagement more, if we are going to embrace technology more, if we know the student need in terms of the diversity of need, we're now coming from a mental health point of view, from approaches to learning, then I think our view on it is that we have a training team. We look at how they become coaches, how do they bring different elements in. And so I think there is an element of looking at, again, not saying high quality teaching is what you see in schools and what you're seeing in higher education institutions. There is a difference about this sector which we should be really proud of and be teaching towards, I think.
Two things for me. One is probably the most important person in someone learning, if they're in a job, is not their tutor at college, is not their assessor, it's their line manager. And unless we incorporate the line manager into all of this, then we're sort of messing around at the edges, really. The other thing I'd say is when it comes to research, how do we build the research base? I think we've got to be way, way more curious than we are. I'm always amazed. I mean, neuroscience is quite new. Like the first fMRI machines that were sort of available for research was sort of the very end of the 20th century, 1999, 2000. And most of their early research in the noughties was on pathology, so brains that have gone wrong. It's only more recently that they've turned to brains that are, working without a pathology. So we're only just learning some of this stuff. But does anyone ever talk about acetylcholine in there when they're talking about their... I mean, that's like going to a building conference and saying no one talks about concrete. That this is how brains work. We have to be more curious about how brains work, because actually we are now learning how brains work when it comes to skills acquisition, the process of new synaptic engagements, learning, unlearning, myelin sheaths and how that affects... We know this stuff now, but we as a sector need to be way more curious about it and say, why is that person learning? Why is that teacher getting better results than that other teacher? Why is that line manager particularly good at getting the best out of what was a really difficult... We thought it was going to be a really difficult apprentice, but actually they've cracked it. What is going on? Because we now have the tools to understand that a bit. So I would say, unless we're curious, we ain't going to get the research we want.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, we've done a series of kind of debates through Edge over recent years on the kind of principles and philosophy of vocational education. I think one of the key points that's come out of that really reinforces what Ben was saying about the WorldSkills methodology, which is why do policymakers tend to think that vocational education should just follow academic education to get better, should have more of an endpoint assessment, should look more like that. Actually, vocational education is its own thing. It's its own fantastic thing. It needs to stand on its own 2 feet. It needs to have its own pedagogy, its own reason for doing things. And I think that's a really important shift that we need to make collectively and help policymakers to make, to think actually, we can learn from things like the WorldSkills methodology. We can learn from the fantastic things that are happening on the ground, but it can be distinct from academic education, and that can be a really good thing. And actually, there's lots of things like having a range of different ways to assess that academic education should be learning from vocational education. And the other point I wanted to make was there was a really good Social Mobility Commission report a couple of years ago which recommended a fully funded What Works Centre for FE. And I don't think that giving more money to EF is the same as that, because they're looking at mainly GCSE retakes. What we need, if we're serious about, if it has its own pedagogy and then we're serious about getting that pedagogy even better, is to have a properly funded What Works Centre to investigate that and disseminate the results.
So I'm hearing here a thread about professionalism in the sector, which of course we do, all of us here in ETF. It's our bread and butter with the professional standards and ensuring that we have that continuous professional development embedded in reflective practice. We talk about transfer of innovation. We talk about the importance of recognizing the role of that line manager, the employer. I don't want to miss that point from Ben, because that's very important in every single setting. And that research capacity, I thought, increasing research capacity and capability in the system is something that I heard quite strongly as a thread. So quite a lot there, and possibly a chapter of the publication, I'm sure, Ben and Vicky, around just that, because there's something about the beginning of where do you start, that initial teacher education, all the way up to where you land with your career progression, and there's a trajectory all way through. So thanks very much. You can see that question probably generated a chapter in the publication, so thank you. Any more provocations?
Could I have a show of hands how many questions we've got? So we've got 30 minutes left, so I'm trying to get as many. So
perhaps we can get a group, Gavin, and we can ask our panel to try and group their answers, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I'll hand over here first, and I'll try to skim it. So if we could maybe grab 2 questions, would be cool.
Hi there, thank you. Caroline McDonald from Holex. Hi, it's actually nice to see the flesh of people rather than just LinkedIn and Twitter visions. Hi. It would be remiss of me not to talk about adults, I think. I've had quite a few people talk to me in the break about this. And I'm particularly interested because I think when we talk about skills, there's a couple of issues that I think we face. One of them being that is that we see a 16 to 25-year-old category of person traditionally. And actually, the other part I think is attached is that I think sometimes the word even skills, it can have a sort of like deficit language attached to it, because I think we've all got different perspectives, historical, present tense, whatever you might want to call it, about what we mean by the word skills. So for me, what I'd like to hear from the panel is actually, what's the vision for adults in this? What's the vision? Because there is no way this government is going to achieve growth on the 16 to 24 market alone. And I'm really concerned that we are not actually angling and beefing up the language far more around adults. And obviously I represent the adult and community education sector, but I don't primarily represent that. I think about adults in its greatest term. We are all adults, I think, in this room. So we all know what it means to retrain, be prepared for the future of work. But I just feel like it's a bit lacking at the moment, particularly in this conversation. I'd be really grateful to hear that a little bit more.
First of all, Caroline, can I just welcome you to the collective, and lovely to see you, and it's wonderful to have you as part of HOLEX. And I'm going to pick up a couple more, and we'll get into
cool.
all
I
of
was
them.
going to hand over. I think it's interesting you're saying as well, because in Singapore, I've just come back from OECD, UNESCO. Retirement ages are increasing across the world for workforce, and we're looking at adult with that. It's a really massive part of their 2-day conference there. Jane, can I ask what you...
Hi everybody, my name's Jane Knight. Hi Ben, from Successful Mums Career Academy. So thank you for having me today here. Thank you, Gavin. So Ben, I want to say congratulations if you've got a 6-year-old baby, because that's lovely, but it's also very tiring. And Ben, thank you for the work you're doing with the AELP, because I know that you're a real champion for ITPs, and putting a positive slant on the work we're doing in the sector is actually really good, but we just want to keep improving, don't we? So linked back to Ben's point about being a parent, I just wanted to get the word women returners and mothers into the conversation today. I think there's a relatively untapped market of economically inactive, skilled women here that we've been supporting for the past decade. A lot of these women have worked in corporate, they've worked in industries that we are crying out for in the FE sector, and they want to have a career break, they want to do something different. And if we can take them through the relevant qualifications, give them an understanding of our sector, they will make perfect staff. They've got so much to bring, they've got maturity to bring. We run a midlife mums programme for the over 50s, and also so many economically inactive, unemployed women as well. That will just be great for our sector. So there's a really untapped market there that we should be looking at, as an industry.
Thank you. And actually, I do think the 2 points are quite connected.
Perhaps,
so we'll
adult,
come back.
Adult and adult, really, isn't it?
So we've got the vision for adults from Caroline, and obviously that untapped market of mothers, and with all the entrepreneurial skills and career progression and back into career or change of career kind of opportunity. Philip.
Yeah, great questions, and I completely agree. I think we are lacking a clearer vision for lifelong learning, which we've kind of talked about for so long. But I think we've got to tackle some of the barriers that exist within the ecosystem currently that don't support adults undertaking education and training, and specifically, obviously, women returners as well. And those barriers are many and various. We've talked earlier on about some of the unnecessary barriers there are to apprenticeships, which hopefully are going to be reduced around minimum 12 months. Well, is that appropriate in all cases? But there are also barriers in relation to flexibility of how programs can be delivered. And I think, again, there's a huge opportunity as we start to look at modularising elements of programs that support people who are in work, perhaps in multiple different jobs, that give them that flexibility to access education and training in the way that suits them. With all of that, the funding system has to kind of keep pace, and at the moment, it is too complex, and we've got too many people falling through the cracks. So, we've yet to really see the lifelong learning entitlement kick in. Ideally, that will enable people to upskill in areas that are relevant to them and be able to make transitions into different roles. But there are still quite a lot of question marks about how that's going to work in practice. So we've got to try and remove the barriers that are essentially preventing people from accessing the training that they need at different points in their lives.
I mentioned the neuroscience in my first answer. It's really relevant here. So some of the emerging science around this is that there is actually a change in how the human brain works sometime in the mid-20s, where it goes from being a learning machine. If you think about your 6-week-old who is learning like crazy at the moment, too busy learning how to move hands and feet, and what happens when you make this noise and dad comes or doesn't come, as the case may be. But our brains are learning machines. That's what makes us special from other animals. but that process drops off a cliff sometime in your mid-20s, and there are evolutionary reasons for that, because actually if you were to keep on experimenting and learning all the way through your life, then it would be a really risky band of humans that you'd be taking around the savannah with you. You need to kind of settle on something and stick with it. But it means that adult learning is harder. It's much harder to do. Physiologically, it's harder to learn as an adult than it is as a teenager, or especially a child. And that's reflected as well because it's socially harder to learn as an adult, because you've done your rites of passage. Lots of our education is built around the very natural process of rites of passage, what you go through with your peers. If you're an adult and you are supposedly beyond that in sort of anthropological terms, and suddenly you're being asked to go and do something that's hard and that is potentially kind of exposes you, leaves you vulnerable, because you're saying there's stuff here I don't know. And we have to make the system respond to that. And that comes back to Jane's point, I think, about how you build programs, peers and purpose, and building programs around that. But peers are incredibly important in building adult learning, where someone who's about to do something a bit maybe embarrassing or makes them vulnerable because they're saying, I need to do something different. The previous 20 years of my adult life haven't been quite right. I need to do something different. They need peers to look along the line and say, this person's going to go through the same process as me, and they're with me alongside me. I think that is really important for adult learning, that we all acknowledge that it's not the same thing as teaching someone at school, or even a teenager or someone in their early 20s.
Thank you. I think we're going to take a final question, perhaps. I've got Gavin as well, so we'll do two. We'll do them together.
Okay, hi. I'm Andrea Cowans. I work for Illuminate Education Group, Leeds City College. Hello, panel. My question's about exclusion as well, so it sort of follows on from a couple of the comments other colleagues have raised, and it's around that exclusion of young people from the system. So we're talking about further education and independent training providers and our role in educating and developing a strong skills system for the future. But what I would note increasingly is the number of young people that are excluded from the system for various reasons, and whether that is because of extended school non-attendance, because of emotional mental health and well-being, because of elective home education, or supposedly elective home education, but a whole load of issues that are affecting our young people that aren't just around the way they are in and of themselves, but are around those structural barriers that are in place within our society that stop some of our young people from actually accessing the education and training that they need. And by that I'm referring to something a number of colleagues will be aware of, which is the lack of sufficiency of post-16 places in many of our cities in the country. In England, I'm not sure how Wales and Scotland are featuring in this, but certainly within the core cities group, we're seeing issues around numbers of places that are funded, DFE funding for the places is not adding up to the same number of young people that are living within that local population. And what's happening effectively is that those that are more marginalised, whether that's because of economic disadvantage or those other issues that I've raised, have less ability to access the education and training that we so value in terms of developing the skills of our young people, and then obviously making sure that they don't become adults who need to re-engage and enter into education later. So I suppose my question is, what needs to happen around policy and planning for both capital and revenue funding, but for place planning, for sufficiency, for curriculum design, for pedagogy? How do we teach and engage these young people as well? It's such a huge question that touches so many places.
And finally from Gavin.
Thank you, Katerina. And this question I was going to ask earlier, and then I decided to bring it into this panel, and then it changed about 10 times. But Gavin Lumsden from Essential Teaching UK, and we are an initial training provider organisation, and we ultimately work with colleges to help them retain firstly, recruit. That's always a good one first. To recruit, retain, refresh, and refocus the staff. And I'm in danger of doing myself out of job if anyone can give me the right answer to this, which is who should be the gatekeeper of good practice? So everything we do links into the last lady's comment with having learner impact, and then links to everybody else's question, which is, we've got a system that doesn't invest in its own people, both learners and teachers, coaches, supports, mentors. Someone made the comment earlier, is you don't need to be qualified to be a teacher. Amazing. Thankfully, most of the colleges I work with disagree. But also there's then not always the natural pathway to support and refresh the staff within. So, long-winded question, but short answer hopefully, who should be the gatekeeper to make that more attractive to those coming into the profession? Part-time individuals can't do an apprenticeship because that includes 20% more off the job. Full-time people can't do an apprenticeship because it requires them to have 20% off the job. So colleges, in their own right, aren't using the training that is there for them because it doesn't fit the purpose, which is why I deliver most of our teacher training between 6 and 9 in the evening. Thank you.
So some question around recruitment and retention, obviously, and exclusions. Who would like to pick what?
Can I pick up just from the end of the last conversation and kind of linking into this? Because I think there's this really important point. And again, it's one that we've gone back and forth on. I'd like to get a wider kind of perspective on it, maybe perhaps in the afternoon. But this point about kind of big qualifications versus components. And it feels like maybe we've swung a bit too much the other way, because you can't say to an adult or a mum returning who needs a top up of 20% that they need to do the whole 100% of a 2-year full-time apprenticeship. But that is what we say all the time. And going to other countries, that's absolutely not the case. I know the Nordic countries get banded around a lot, but going to Finland, seeing the kind of the end tests for their components being taken by people who've just finished their studies in the college, but also by people who've been working on the job and want to sign things off, and be able to take individual components of that to then top yourself up. Just felt a lot, even from a boring treasury perspective, that's so much more efficient than paying for a full 2-year qualification for somebody who's returning. So that was kind of very much on my mind. I think the places planning point, just to pick up that point slightly as well, is a great example. We talked in the earlier session about where do you set the slider between national and local, and that's clearly an area where there should be a really clear national responsibility for understanding demographics and appointing the right amount of money and doing it really transparently. And your example suggests that clearly isn't happening. But that for me is one of the things where there should be a really clear single point of access. And then once that funding is devolved, then there should be a lot more kind of opportunity for localities to make a decision about where to spend that money. And if that's not happening, that's a great kind of point to raise as part of this discussion.
Yeah. Oh, final word. That's a lot of pressure. Just to, I guess, come back to the point around kind of inclusion. And I guess it's a question about capacity, isn't it? And about the fact that actually the system is not set up to deal with the amount of need that's going on. And I guess the obvious answer to that is greater investment, and that would be the nice way to say you just need to put more money in. But I think actually that that's probably less likely to happen. And so I do think I come back to my kind of earlier point around, is there a way of us creating space to look at the roles that we've already got within the system differently? And I do think Sally again talked about it earlier when she was talking about changing the nature of the role of those in colleges, in provision, from admin and crowd control and filling in those things into looking at how do you really invest in the lives of the young people you're there? How do you deliver provision in a way that's not just exciting to them, but exciting to you as well? And so I think and again, some of the work that we're looking at doing as well is looking at, can we run small pilots? Can we look at evidence-based approaches that tries to help with, yes, making provision more impactful, but creating capacity for those that are kind of at the front line? And I guess the thing for me is trying to avoid burnout, trying to avoid people just literally, because the thing is, people in this sector, and I think Olly said, everyone in this room is up for doing their best job they can, and I know all the teams you work with, all the people in your organisations are there because they want to do the best they can. So we've got to look at how do we give them some space to do things differently. I guess it's a very incomplete answer to a very big, complicated question, but yeah.
So I did say Ben would have the last word. I just didn't say which Ben. So.
So I think it's one of these things where we should celebrate the strengths and work with the strengths of what we've got. I know youth provision has been, traditional council-funded youth provision has been decimated, but there is tons of amazing work done in the voluntary sector to engage young people. I think we as a skills system need to reach out to that and say, you've engaged them, now how can we best take them on? And maybe we should be learning from them rather than saying you've got to fit how we do things.
Thank you, panel. Thank you, collective. I think you've given us excellent food for thought and some music for the afternoon discussion. So hopefully really, really good points for the national conversation. So if we can just demonstrate and thank our panelists.